Welcome to Silent Queen's Judgment. I'm glad you're here. Now, let's get into the story. The night Whitmore Developments parked two company SUVs in front of Iris Calloway's secondhand furniture shop on the edge of Kensington Market, her ex-husband Bennett Whitmore had exactly one goal. He wanted her to watch herself lose. He had brought along his new girlfriend, a 26-year-old lifestyle influencer named Tasha, who had recently described Kensington Market on her Instagram as charmingly gritty, in a struggling artist kind of way. Tasha wore a camel-colored Max Mara coat and carried a structured Celine bag, the color of wet sand. She had never once, in the 2 years she had been dating Bennett, set foot in a shop that didn't have a doorman. Bennett had also brought his corporate lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Garrett, who charged $900 an hour and had the warm bedside manner of a parking ticket. The three of them stood on the sidewalk outside Calloway and found Iris's small shop, tucked between a Portuguese bakery and an independent record store. And Bennett looked at the hand-painted wooden sign above the door, the way a man looks at a campfire he is about to put out. Iris Calloway watched them from the window. She was 41 years old, and she had learned a very long time ago how to keep her face completely still when she needed to. She set down the cup of tea she'd been drinking, a proper Earl Grey from a small ceramic pot she'd bought at a potter's market in Elora, and she walked to the door and opened it. "Bennett," she said. She did not say anything else. She didn't need to. She had spent 11 years married to this man. She knew exactly how much he hated a silence that he hadn't manufactured himself. Bennett was 49, and he wore it the way men like him always do, expensively. He had the kind of silver at his temples that is very deliberately maintained, the kind of jawline kept taut by a twice-weekly trainer, the kind of suit that costs more than most people's monthly rent, and is designed to make everyone in the room feel it. He was the third-generation head of Whitmore Developments, a real estate firm that had spent the last 4 decades methodically buying, gutting, and redeveloping old commercial properties across Toronto and southern Ontario. He smiled at Iris. It was the smile he used in boardrooms. "You look tired," he said. Tasha pressed herself slightly into Bennett's arm and aimed a small, sharp smile at Iris, the way you aim a flashlight into a space you don't particularly want to walk into. "This is the shop?" Tasha said, tilting her head to look at the window display. Iris had arranged a 1940s writing desk beside a cluster of pressed glass vases, a hand-embroidered linen tablecloth, and a lamp with a shade the color of old honey. It was a beautiful window. Tasha looked at it the way you look at something when you've already decided it isn't worth looking at. "It's very quaint." Iris stepped back from the door and held it open. "Come in," she said. The shop was not large. That was the first thing people always said when they walked in, and then immediately stopped saying, because once you were inside, the smallness became something else. Iris had a gift. It was the only word for it, for making a space feel inhabited. Every piece of furniture in the shop had been sourced, restored, and placed with the kind of deliberate care that takes years to develop and looks entirely effortless. An Art Deco credenza sat against the north wall, its original hardware polished to a warm, deep bronze. Above it hung 3 framed botanical illustrations, mid-century, in their original frames. The kind of thing you found occasionally at estate sales in Prince Edward County, if you'd been doing this long enough to know where to look. A pair of tufted wingback chairs flanked the small fireplace, non-functioning, but dressed in a way that made you want to pull one of them closer anyway. The floor was original wide plank pine, stripped and refinished by Iris herself, over 3 long weekends the first winter she'd had the space. It glowed amber in the afternoon light. Tasha walked in and immediately looked at the price tags. Garrett, the lawyer, walked in and looked at nothing except Bennett. Bennett walked in and looked at Iris. "Still doing the salvage thing," he said, picking up a small ceramic bowl from the top of the credenza, turning it over in his hand. "It's called restoration," Iris said, in the exact same tone she would use to say "of course" or "I know." Not correcting him, just stating a fact for the record. Bennett set the bowl back down, not quite in the same place. "I'm not here to make this unpleasant," he said. He reached inside his jacket and produced a manila envelope. He placed it on top of the credenza next to the bowl. "This has been a long time coming, Iris. The Kensington Corridor project has been approved by the city. Full rezoning, mixed-use commercial and residential. The whole block." He said the whole block the way people say, and that's that. "Your lease is up for renewal in 4 months, Garrett said, stepping forward now, reciting from memory. "Whitmore Developments has purchased the freehold on this building and both adjacent properties. Under the redevelopment agreement with the city, All current commercial tenants will receive notice of non-renewal. Iris did not reach for the envelope. I know, she said. Bennett paused. He had expected something. Tears, maybe. Or the tight-lipped silence of someone trying not to cry. He had experienced both of those things from Iris before. In the sterile mediation room at the family lawyer's office on Bay Street. When the divorce was being finalized 7 years ago. When she'd had to surrender her share of the Rosedale house and accept a settlement that his lawyers had architected to look fair while being, in practical terms, a careful minimization. You know, Bennett repeated. I've been following the rezoning application for 2 years, Iris said. She walked past him toward the small kitchen at the back of the shop, where a second kettle was already on. Tea? Tasha looked at Bennett. He shook his head almost imperceptibly. We don't need tea, Iris, he said, following her with his eyes. We need you to look at the envelope. It's a buyout offer. It's more than generous considering you're a tenant and not an owner. I convinced the board to include a goodwill sum on top of standard lease buyout. He paused. For old time's sake. Tasha snorted softly. She wandered toward the wingback chairs and ran one finger along the piped edge of the upholstery, the way a person does when they're evaluating something they intend to throw away. It's very small, Tasha said, looking around the shop again. Like for what you'd pay in this neighborhood, couldn't you just work from home? Iris came back from the kitchen, carrying a single mug of tea for herself. She sat down in the chair nearest the fireplace, crossing one leg over the other with the unhurried ease of a woman in her own home. How much? She said. Garrett named a number. It was, technically, above what the lease termination clause required. It was also, Iris knew, because she had done the math quite carefully quite a long time ago, roughly 1/16 of what the commercial unit was about to be worth, once the rezoning was finalized and construction bids went out. She nodded slowly, as though she was genuinely considering it. And the timeline, she said. 60 days from your signature, Garrett said. To vacate? Yes. Iris took a sip of her tea. Bennett relaxed slightly. He recognized this posture in her, or he thought he did. He thought it was the posture of a woman who had run out of options and was quietly making peace with that fact. He had seen it in the mediation room. He had seen it the morning. She'd carried a single box of her own things out of the Rosedale house without asking him for help. He had always interpreted her stillness as resignation. He had never once understood that it was the opposite. Bennett, Iris said, looking at him over the rim of her mug. Why did you come yourself? He blinked. I told you, I wanted to handle this personally. We have a history. You have 4 project managers and a legal team, Iris said. You don't personally deliver lease non-renewal notices to tenants. She set her mug down on the small side table beside the chair. She looked at him with the same steady gray eyes she'd had when she was 29, and they'd met at an architectural salvage auction in the Distillery District, where she'd outbid him for a set of original transom windows from a demolished annex schoolhouse, and he'd found that so annoying. He'd asked for her number. You came because you want to watch, she said. Same as always. Bennett opened his mouth. Iris stood up. There's something I'd like to show you, she said. Come through. She led them toward the back of the shop, past the kitchen, through a narrow door that Garrett had to angle his briefcase to get through, and into the back room. The back room was where Iris did her restoration work. Garrett expected clutter. Tasha expected dust. Bennett expected the sad, chaotic workshop of a woman making the best of a modest life. The room was none of those things. It was a working studio, and it was extraordinary. The ceiling had been raised at some point, or perhaps it had always been this height, and no one had thought to pay attention. A long north-facing skylight ran the full length of the room, and the afternoon light fell clean and even across 2 enormous work tables. The first table, a Georgian library table, sat mid-restoration, its surface stripped back to raw mahogany, its legs re-gilded at the feet with gold leaf so fine it seemed to glow from the inside. On the second table were pieces Iris was currently cataloging, a set of 6 Edwardian side chairs with their original needlepoint seats intact, a pair of arts and crafts wall sconces in hammered copper, and a flat wooden crate containing what appeared to be. Tasha leaned in despite herself. A set of hand-blown glass cabinet pulls in a shade of green so particular, and deep it looked like lake water in August. Against the far wall were built-in shelving units, floor to ceiling, organized with the quiet precision of a museum archive. Every piece tagged, every provenance card filled out in Iris's small, exact handwriting. This? Tasha said, and then stopped, because she didn't have the vocabulary to finish the sentence in a way that wouldn't sound like a compliment. Bennett stood in the center of the room. His face had done something complicated. "I've been doing more than running a second-hand shop," Iris said, pulling on a pair of thin cotton restoration gloves. "For the last 4 years, I've been the primary restoration consultant for the Harrington Estate collection." She said it the way she said everything. Like a fact. Like it was obvious. Like she couldn't imagine why anyone would need it explained. Bennett knew the Harrington Estate. Every person in Toronto's property and heritage sectors knew the Harrington Estate. It was a collection of over 3,000 pieces of Canadian and British antique furniture accumulated by the Harrington family over 4 generations, valued most recently at something in the range of $40 million. The estate had been bequeathed to a private cultural trust. It was, in heritage circles, one of the most significant private collections in the country. "You're the consultant," Bennett said slowly. "I'm the senior consultant," Iris said. "I took the contract 2 years after we divorced. I've been here every morning at 6. She lifted the corner of a linen cloth on the third work table to reveal a small writing box, a Regency period traveling desk in mahogany and brass that sat under a magnifying lamp in the process of having its original felt liner carefully separated from the interior. "Part of the work is done here. Part is done on-site at the Harrington storage facility in Etobicoke." She recovered the piece and turned to face Bennett. "The collection goes to public auction in 11 months, she said. "My restoration work is the reason that auction catalog is going to open at $42 million instead of 30. The room was quiet. The afternoon light moved slightly through the skylight as a cloud passed. Outside, through the alley window, the Portuguese bakery was piping something warm and sweet into the air. Bennett said, "I didn't know." "No," Iris agreed. "You didn't." Garrett cleared his throat. "That's all very impressive, Iris, but the rezoning—" "I know about the rezoning," Iris said pleasantly. She walked back to the main studio table and picked up a plain manila folder of her own. Not the same one Bennett had brought, a different one entirely, and held it out. Garrett took it. He opened it. His face changed. Bennett watched his lawyer read. Garrett was not a man whose face moved much. It was part of what Bennett paid him for. But right now something was shifting behind Garrett's eyes that Bennett had not seen before. "What is it?" Tasha asked, looking between the two men. She had been quiet for almost 3 minutes, which was a personal record. Garrett looked up from the folder. He looked at Iris. He looked back at Bennett. "The building," Garrett said, with the careful precision of a man diffusing something. "Did your acquisitions team pull a full heritage register check when you bought the freehold?" Bennett frowned. "Obviously. Calloway and Found is not a heritage-designated property." "The building isn't," Garrett said. He held out a single page from the folder toward Bennett. "But the lot is." The silence in the restoration studio had a quality to it that Iris had not manufactured and did not need to. It had arrived entirely on its own. "The property at 44 Weston Lane," Garrett said, reading carefully, "sits on a lot that was designated under Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act in 1987. The designation covers the subsurface archaeology." He turned the page. A 1986 survey, conducted ahead of the original building's renovation, identified significant pre-Confederation structural remnants. Specifically, the original stone foundation of a mid-1800s commercial building that was part of the early Kensington settlement. The designation was registered to the lot itself, not the standing building. He lowered the paper. "The city's rezoning approval," Garrett said, "is contingent on a heritage impact assessment for any development that involves subsurface disturbance." He paused. "The Kensington Corridor project, as submitted, includes underground parking on this lot." Bennett stared at him. "Which means," Garrett continued, with the tone of a man who does not enjoy saying the thing he is about to say, "the entire project's timeline is contingent on an HIA that, given the significance of the subsurface designation, could take 12 to 18 months to complete, during which time your development permits cannot be issued. And," Iris said softly, picking up her mug of tea from where she'd set it down, "you cannot require any current commercial tenant to vacate a property involved in an active heritage review." She looked at Bennett. "I found the original 1986 survey in the City of Toronto archives 3 years ago," she said. "It took me about a month of Saturday afternoons." She took a sip of her tea. "I've been a heritage consultant, too, in a small way. It tends to come with the territory." Bennett said nothing. His jaw was doing something it hadn't done in a very long time. "I submitted a formal request for heritage review to the city last Thursday," Iris said. "The acknowledgement is in the folder. The file number is on the second page." She walked back to the work table. and lifted the edge of the linen cloth over the Regency writing box again, as though resuming a task that had been interrupted. "You should probably call your permits team," she said. "Tonight, I think, would be better than waiting," Tasha said. "Bennett." She said it the way people say a word when they are no longer sure it means what they thought it meant. "Bennett, what is she talking about?" "The underground parking is already in the renders. My building manager says our building is getting the same, Tasha." Bennett's voice came out very flat and very even, which was how she knew it was serious. He took the folder from Garrett. He read the second page. He read it again. "Call Meredith," he said to Garrett. "It's almost 5 on a Thursday," Garrett said. "Call Meredith," Bennett said again. Garrett stepped into the hallway and dialed. Bennett stood in the middle of the restoration studio, holding the folder, and did not speak. He looked at the Georgian table with its re-gilded feet. He looked at the catalogued Edwardian chairs. He looked at the wall of provenance cards. He looked like a man reading the blueprint of a building he had designed and noticing, for the first time, that the foundation belonged to someone else. Garrett came back in. His voice was professionally neutral in the way that is indistinguishable from barely controlled alarm. "Meredith says the acquisitions team flagged the subsurface designation during due diligence," Garrett said quietly. "She says it was noted as low risk, manageable with project timeline adjustments." "And the heritage review application?" Bennett said. She was not aware one had been filed. Bennett closed his eyes for a moment. The Kensington Corridor project was not simply a development. It was the centerpiece of Whitmore Development's pitch to a major institutional investor, a Vancouver-based pension fund that had committed to a partnership deal worth $160 million, contingent on shovel-ready status by the first quarter of next year. A 12 to 18-month heritage impact assessment didn't just delay the underground parking. It delayed everything. The permits, the pre-sales, the partnership draw, the entire project. "What does a heritage review delay do to the investor agreement?" Bennett asked very quietly. Garrett's silence lasted 2 seconds. It was the loudest 2 seconds in the room. "It triggers the force majeure clause," Garrett said, "which gives Sinclair Partners the right to withdraw." Bennett sat down in one of the Edwardian chairs. It was an odd thing to do in someone else's restoration workshop in the middle of a business conversation. But he sat down anyway, and Iris did not say anything about it. "How long have you known about Sinclair Partners?" Bennett asked her. "Since the investor's announcement was covered in the Globe 14 months ago," Iris said simply. "You gave a quote about the Kensington neighborhood being ripe for reinvention. I still have the clipping." Tasha was looking at Iris with an expression that had started as dismissal and had quietly, over the last 15 minutes, become something more like the look you get when you realize the weather has changed and you left your umbrella somewhere you can't go back to. "You've known for over a year," Bennett said. Not a question. More like reading a sentence out loud to make sure he understood the words. "I've known about the subsurface designation since 3 years ago," Iris said. "I knew about Sinclair Partners 14 months ago. The heritage review application I filed last Thursday." She set her mug down on the table very gently. "I wanted to make sure you had the permits in hand before I filed. I wanted the timeline to hurt as much as possible." The room absorbed that sentence and held it. "You could have done this sooner," Bennett said. "I could have done this when the rezoning was first approved," Iris agreed. "At that point, you were out a redevelopment permit and a few months of planning work." Manageable. She leaned against the work table, unhurried, the afternoon light from the skylight catching the fine linen of her restoration gloves. "I needed you to get further in. I needed the investor agreement signed, and the permits nearly issued, and the project renders on your website, and your name in the Globe and Mail, and Tasha's building manager already telling the neighbors about the underground parking." She looked at him steadily. "I needed you to taste it," she said. "The same way you let me taste what stability looked like before you decided I wasn't the right fit for the life you were building." The 11 years of their marriage occupied the room for a moment, uninvited. Iris had met Bennett when she was 29 and newly finished her master's in architectural history at U of T, when she was doing freelance consulting for heritage property owners and building the quiet foundation of a specialized knowledge that she couldn't have explained to most people at a dinner party, but that she understood, with absolute clarity, was worth something real. Bennett had been 40 then, already running Whitmore Developments, already the kind of man who had strong opinions as about other people's vision. She had loved him for a while, in the specific and complicated way You love someone who is brilliant at the thing they do and deeply uninterested in anything they cannot quantify. But the marriage had hollowed out steadily, the way timber does when something is working at it from the inside. By the end, she had been contributing her heritage expertise to Whitmore projects, writing impact assessments, advising on designation risks, reviewing site histories, without a contract, without credit, without compensation, because she was part of the family business. And that was how it worked. His lawyers, when the divorce came, had been very careful to characterize her contributions as spousal support, rather than professional services. It had taken her years to understand what had actually been taken. 7 years ago, Iris said, your lawyers told me in that mediation room that my work for Whitmore Developments was a goodwill contribution with no quantifiable market value, that the heritage consulting work I'd been doing for 4 years as part of our marriage was not billable, was not compensable, was not something I was owed for. She paused. Garrett was in that room. Garrett, to his credit, did not deny it. I thought about what I was worth for a long time after that, Iris said, and then I stopped thinking about it in those terms. I already knew what I was worth. I just needed to build the evidence. She straightened up from the work table. The Harrington contract is worth, with the auction premium clause, just under $2 million over the full engagement term, she said. My consulting firm. I incorporated 3 years ago. It's called Calloway Heritage Advisors. Has 4 other active contracts with private estate collectors and 1 ongoing file with the City of Toronto's Built Heritage Office. She looked at Bennett without a flicker of performance in her expression. I don't need the Kensington corridor buyout. I never needed it. I stayed in this shop because I wanted to be exactly here when this moment came. Tasha put down the card she had been holding, a Providence card from one of the Edwardian chairs, and set her Celine bag on the Georgian table, then immediately picked it up again when she registered the gold-leafed feet. Bennett, Tasha said. Her voice was a different shape than it had been 20 minutes ago. The Sinclair partnership. Does this change the Whistler trip? You said we were going for 2 weeks in February, and the rental was non-refundable. Bennett did not answer her. And the condo? Tasha continued, her voice rising in register, the way it did when she felt a situation moving away from her. You said the Kensington project was going to fund the build on the King West unit. That was going to be Tasha, Bennett said. I need you to stop talking. I am not going to stop talking, Tasha said, with surprising conviction. Because I turned down a 3-month brand partnership with a hotel group to come to Toronto this year, because you told me Whitmore was in its biggest growth phase, and that by next spring. I can fix this, Bennett said. He said it automatically, the way people say things they haven't yet assessed for truth. Iris watched him. She did not feel the hot, jagged thing she'd imagined. She might feel in this moment, in all the years she'd been quietly, patiently preparing for it. She'd half expected vindication to feel like something dramatic. It didn't. It felt like finishing a very long and demanding piece of restoration work, like stepping back from the table and seeing that the thing you've been tending to was, all along, precisely as sound as you knew it was. Bennett, she said, not unkindly, you can't fix it. The Heritage Review is a matter of public record now. Sinclair Partners has a compliance team that monitors city filings. They probably already know. As if the moment had been waiting for its cue, Bennett's phone began to vibrate against his leg. He looked at the screen. He looked at it for a long time without answering. He put it to his ear. Marcus, he said. The voice on the other end was audible across the quiet room. Clipped, serious. The voice of someone who did not want to be making this call. Bennett, we just got flagged on a Heritage Review application filed to the city last Thursday at 44 Weston Lane. Our compliance team says it could impact the H2 permits. I need to know if you were aware of this before we signed the partnership agreement, because if you were, Marcus, because if you were, Bennett, this is not a timeline issue. This is a disclosure issue. The room was very still. Iris walked to the north-facing skylight window. Outside, Kensington Market was doing what it did in the late afternoon. Musicians setting up on Augusta, the smell of roasting coffee from the shop on the corner, someone with a cart full of pressed flowers navigating the bike lane. She had watched this neighborhood from this window for 6 years. She knew every small change. She knew which stores had lasted and which hadn't. She knew the quality of the light in every season. She had built a life here quietly, with the precision and patience of someone who had learned to work with old things, to understand that what looks worn or diminished from the outside is often, if you know how to look, exactly what it was always meant to be. I have to go, Bennett said into the phone. I'll call you back in 20 minutes. He lowered the phone. He looked around the restoration studio. At the ordered shelves, the Provenance archive, the Regency writing box, with its original felt, and its original brass hardware, and its small, irreplaceable particularity. And something moved through his expression that Iris recognized, distantly, from a long time ago. It was the look he used to get in the early years, before the money got so large that it replaced his curiosity, when they'd go to salvage sales on Saturday mornings, and he'd pick up some scarred, unlikely piece of furniture and see something in it that surprised him. Iris, he said, what would it take to withdraw the review? She turned from the window. Nothing, she said, because I'm not withdrawing it. Name a number. There isn't one. He looked at her, and she could see him calculating, trying to find the lever, the variable, the negotiation point. The shop, he said. You'd have to eventually relocate anyway, even with the review. I can offer you a long-term commercial lease in the Riverside development. Comparable square footage, better foot traffic, and a financial settlement that recognizes, retroactively, the heritage consulting work you did during the marriage. Iris let the offer sit in the air between them for a moment. 7 years ago, she said, your lawyers said that work had no quantifiable market value. She looked at him without bitterness and without warmth. I don't need your retroactive valuation, Bennett. I know exactly what it's worth. I've always known. She pulled off her restoration gloves and set them on the table. Take your envelope, she said. Garrett can see himself out. Tasha left first. She left without saying goodbye to Iris, which was fine. She walked down the narrow hallway, past the shop floor with its walnut credenza and its amber pine floors, and out onto the Kensington sidewalk, where she stood for a moment checking her phone before walking toward the parked SUVs. A moment later, Iris heard the vehicle start, then pull away. Garrett gathered his briefcase and folder and followed, leaving Bennett a neutrally professional look on his way out that said, without words, I will send you my invoice and I will not be advising on this one further. Bennett stood alone in the restoration studio for another 30 seconds. Iris waited. You never told me any of this was coming, he said. Not angry exactly. More like someone who has found the structural flaw in a building they were confident in. No, Iris said. I didn't. How long? The day I found the 1986 survey, she said. 3 years ago. A Saturday afternoon. I was in the city archives on Spadina, and it was raining, and I pulled the lot history on a routine check, and there it was. She looked at the Regency writing box under its linen cloth. I had a very quiet cup of tea after that and thought about it for a long time. And then I filed the incorporation papers for Calloway Heritage Advisors the following Monday. Bennett looked at her. You sat on it for 3 years, he said. I built something with it for 3 years, she said. There's a difference. He had nothing left after that. He picked up the manila envelope from the work table, where Iris had never once touched it, and he walked out through the narrow door and down the hallway and out the front door of Calloway and found, and the brass bell above the door rang with its small, clear note, and then was quiet. Iris locked the front door at 5. She did it the same way she always did. The deadbolt first, then the chain, then a brief pause to straighten the price card on the Art Deco credenza that someone had tilted slightly when they ran their finger along the hardware. She turned the sign in the window from open to closed. She went to the back studio and finished what she'd been doing before they arrived. The Regency writing box took another 40 minutes. The original felt liner came away from the interior in one clean piece, which was unusual and satisfying, and Iris set it aside carefully, photographed it, noted the dimensions and condition in the provenance card, and began the delicate work of preparing the box's interior for the new lining, an archival-grade period-appropriate silk that the Harrington Trust had sourced from a specialist in Bath, England, and which had arrived 2 weeks ago in a tissue-lined box, no bigger than a shoebox. At 6:30, she made a proper dinner in the small kitchen at the back of the shop. Pasta with a very good olive oil, some cherry tomatoes she'd bought from the Tuesday market, a handful of fresh basil. She ate it at the work table, surrounded by the quiet company of old things. Her phone lit up at 7 with a message from her colleague at the city's Built Heritage office. Filed ASHA acknowledgement, went out to Whitmore's permits contact this afternoon. They're going to have a very long Friday. Iris typed back, good, thanks for letting me know. She set the phone down. Outside, through the alley window, the street was settling into its evening rhythm. Someone was playing guitar 2 doors down. Something slow and Spanish. The light had gone to that deep, particular blue that only happens in October in this city. The blue that makes even the ordinary things. The fire escapes, the hand-lettered signs, the stacked recycling boxes outside the bakery look like they've been thought about. Iris washed her dish, dried it, set it in the cabinet. She looked around her shop. At the walnut credenza and the Georgian table, and the Edwardian chairs waiting in a careful row. At the walls hung with things people had thrown away without understanding what they were. At the 6 years of Saturday mornings, and archive afternoons, and restoration evenings that had accreted, the way good things do, into something that could hold its ground. Bennett had come here to watch her lose. He had forgotten, or perhaps he had never understood, that she had been building this for years. Not for him, not to punish him, but because she knew the value of what she was holding, had always known, had simply been waiting for the moment when the world caught up with her own certainty. She poured herself a small glass of Niagara Riesling, cold and clean, and sat down in the wingback chair by the non-functioning fireplace. The ghost in the foundation, it turned out, was not a problem to be managed. It was hers. It had always been hers. And now, finally, everyone knew it.